It's going.
It's going. It's going. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Anna.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
So, welcome to Mija on the Mic, where Mija, interviews daughters of immigrants who are making moves in their industries around the world. Today, I'm excited to invite our podcast host, podcast executive, and Iranian American daughter of immigrants, Anna Hossnieh. Anna is an Iranian American live comedy video podcast producer and writer who co hosts the very funny and always wonderful Ethnically Ambiguous podcast. So I'm so excited to chat to you because I love your show and I love that your intro is "Who am I? Who are my parents? And where are my pants?" I think many of us can relate to that. So let's jump in. Mija is all about immigrant stories, so I wanna start with your immigrant history. If you can go into it a little bit.
Yeah, so my parents were both born in separate cities in Iran, and they in their early 20s both immigrated to the US to go to college, and they both, in a weird turn of events, ended up in Utah, which is a very interesting state. But at the time, a lot of universities, because it was like, the early to mid 70s, were accepting a lot of Iranian foreign students, basically. They were just all applying to go to university. And I think a lot of Iranians at the time were just going to come to America, get their college degrees, and then go back to Iran. And that was before the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979 when a lot of Iranians who were already here decided, "You know what? I'll stay," unless they were deported or went back for any other reason. So, yeah, my parents both came to Utah separately to go to university, and they ended up meeting each other, at a mutual friend's wedding in the early '80s, I believe, and, yeah, once they met, they decided to get married. Based on my understanding, my dad had already been married once to get a green card, and then he and this woman that he married divorced, and then, when my mom and him met, I think they got married pretty quickly because then my mom needed a green card, but then, they stayed together because, it worked out.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. A true immigrant love story.
Yeah. Based
So,
on sorta like a contractual agreement.
so tell me a little bit about your relationship with Iran and how that culture was kind of present in your home growing up.
I grew up in a very Iranian household, so, we only speak Farsi, like, the culture was very present, so much so that it was almost torturous as a youth who's trying to, like, fit in, you know? It was always very much like it was very clear I was Iranian, and my parents are also very Iranian, so, and we were always surrounded by family friends who were also in the community, like, the Iranian community, so you know, our house always smelled weird to my non-Iranian friends, and I always felt like, I didn't fit in because I was also, like, the one of the, uh, Iranian kids within, like, the Iranian community, so, like, there wasn't a lot of other girls I could, like, hang out with. There were a few here and there, but for the most part, they were, like, a little older than me, so I always sort of felt like, I couldn't relate a lot to people because I was like, "No one gets me," I was very dramatic because I wasn't very good at, like, sort of processing these emotions, and my parents were like, "Well, you have a roof over your head, so be happy." And so it was It I now, in retrospect, am glad I was so deep in the culture and, like, surrounded by Iranians and always speaking Farsi because, I can speak it to this day, and it's nice to be able to communicate with my parents, and also, like, I would go to Iran every few years my whole life, so that was also good because then it allowed me to communicate with my family in Iran, and I could, like, talk to people and, you know, continue to have a relationship with family members who were not in this country because my parents were the only people from their respective families that came to America. Like, no one else in our family is in America except for my parents. So, well, actually, there is like some. My mom claims there's like a random extended cousin who lives in New Jersey, but we never talk to them. So I don't know. I don't know how much if that person is even still in New Jersey potentially, but who knows. Um, so, yeah, I've spent a good amount of time in Iran and I really love it there. I actually haven't been back since 2017. I was there when the sort of Muslim ban happened, when Trump took office, and that was a very sort of stressful experience on my like whole body. Like I remember I like it was such a confusing time because I was in Iran. Everyone's like sending me all this information. I'm like, what is happening? And it really um it's been hard to, sort of motivate myself to go back to Iran, especially when Trump was the president, and then, COVID happened, and it's just COVID was really bad over there, and so it's been a I wanna go back soon because I feel like this is the longest I haven't gone back to Iran, but I'm hoping maybe in the next few years I can find my way back eventually, because a lot of my relatives are getting older, I wanna go back and see them. Potentially for the last few times, you never know.
Yeah, there's so much about the, daughter of immigrant experience that is about that extended family being so far away. I
Yeah.
wonder if there's anyone in your family that, you've been able to have that kind of connection with despite that distance. I don't know if maybe you had someone who inspired you who's back home or in that home, if you could call it home. Where is home?
Yeah, I mean, I still am I communicate with all my cousins and my cousins' kids quite regularly. I mean, like, thanks to social media, like, we're talking all the time. Like, all we do is, like, respond to each other's Instagram stories and be like, "That's funny. What's going on? What's this?" Like, we're always talking. And, we have, like you can use, like, WhatsApp or Telegram, and we, like, text each other, and, um few of the younger cousins have gone to Australia actually to go to college and stuff, so, like, that's pretty cool. So, like, if I wanted to, we could go to, like, Australia and meet up, or there's, like we're definitely in communication, which is nice. Is the tough part is, like, you're actively missing, like, a physical, like, relationship of, like, watching, like, my cousin's, like, young son, who last time I saw him was probably, like, 7 or 8 years old, and I just saw a photo of him, like, the other day, and he's, like, I mean, he's gotta be, like, 13 or 14 now, and I'm like, "Wow, he's, like, a teen." And, like, that's, like, my little baby boy, he's, like, he's growing up, and, like, that's the more tougher part is, like, while we can talk and stuff on, like, social media, it's a very surreal feeling to be, like, you're growing up over like, through photos, and I wish I could be able to, like, actually physically be around them, but yeah, it's a strange thing, and I would say, like, my biggest sort of, I mean, influencer person that, like, meant a lot to me was my uncle, and well, as a couple, my uncle and my aunt, my dad's oldest brother and his wife, they were my uncle passed away a few years ago, and he was such a very sort of patriarchal figure in my household, like, in my family, my Iranian family, and, um, to, like, after he passed away, like, he didn't say a lot. We kinda had a family tragedy when I was, like, 13 or 14 where his son passed away in, like, a very sort of freak accident, incident, and ever since then, he's always been, like, almost like a very quiet, silent type. Like, he only spoke when he really had something to say, and, I just remember I would just spend, like, hours just sitting next to him, and he would just, like, chain smoke and not say anything, but there was, like, almost like a comfort level of just being next to him physically that always, like, sorta gave me this peace of knowing that he was there, and, when he did say stuff to me, like, it was always things that, like, literally, like, changed my whole perspective on, like, my family and, like, my dad and, like, my thoughts on certain things, which was always, like there's very, like, key moments in my life, and where he just in, like, a moment of, like, self-doubt or, like, hurt or, like, sort of anxiety, he would turn to me and just say something, and it would just mean, like, the world to me because he was, like, opening up in this way and telling me something about, like, my family that, like, I didn't know or didn't realize, and I would always just be like, "Whoa." Like, he's giving me, like, almost a gift here that, like, traditionally in, like, immigrant families, like, your parents don't really, like, open up to you, you know? They're not sitting there being like, "Let's dissect our feelings, like, why do we feel these things, or why do we do what we do?" Like, it's so much, like, culturally in Iran, like, you don't sit there and be like, "I'm sad," or "I'm depressed," or "I'm anxious," and like, "Why? Why am I like this?" Like, you don't dissect these emotions, and so it was always very hard for me to, like, understand certain things of, like, maybe, like, "Oh, where does certain mental illness come from in my life?" And he would, like, and it was very small, brief moments just throughout my life, and he would just, like, tell me. Like, just maybe, like, a sentence or 2, and then just go back to being, like, very quiet and, not worried. Uh, but those were, like, very important times in my life, and, um, after he passed away, like, I felt his wife, my aunt, was her presence, like, she's such a strong woman that, like, she just, like, held it down in a way that I was always so I always looked up to her. I thought she was such an incredible figure in my life that she had gone through something so horrible to, like, lose 1, her son early on, and then she lost her husband in a sort of sudden, death, um, that she just her, like, strength and also, like, ability to be a rock for, like, almost everyone around her. I've always very much admired her for that and thought she was just such an incredible woman. Like, I feel like there's a reason my uncle married her. Like, she's almost like a legend in my mind. Like, a part of me sometimes, like, is it real? Like, is she real? She's such a, like, almost majestic figure because she just holds such weight, like, within our
Mhm.
family, and yeah, those are, like, the 2 people that really stand out to me in regard to
That's
answer your question. I feel like I just been
that's
rambling.
beautiful. No, you've really some people answer that question in a lot of different ways, and that was really beautiful to hear. I think something that we have that is so valuable is this connection to family, and if we're
Yeah.
able to maintain it, it's a beautiful thing. But I would like to kind of move on into this side that is more fun, comedy. Tell me about the podcast. Why is it called Ethnically Ambiguous?
It is called Ethnically Ambiguous because so Shreen Yunez and I, my co-host, we would always talk about how we were considered ethnically ambiguous. We'd say like, "Oh, like, no one knows what we are. Everyone thinks, we could be of Latinx origin. We could be, you know" I mean, Shireen has a Persian name, so everyone would think she was Persian, but she's actually Syrian, and so it's like we were always, like, trying to find a way to explain who we are. And that we went to college together, and we were, like, acquaintances because we were in the same major, but, like, we got to know each other after college when we both moved to Los Angeles. And, when we got here, we were both kinda like, "Oh, we have one big thing in common, which is that, like, that we're both ethnically ambiguous, and it's not very clear what we are," and, we always sorta, like, bonded over being kids of immigrants, and when we just started, like, collaborating on a lot of, like, funny little, like, videos and writings and sketches, and then we decided to do a web series on this, sort of women's based YouTube channel called Snarled. We did a web series called Ethnically Ambiguous for 6 episodes, and, we after we did that, it was just, like, a lot of work, and, when you're trying to, like, do stuff on YouTube, and it was kinda, like, it was tough. So, one of the producers on who worked at Snarled was like, "You should make it into a podcast. It'll just be easier to produce and then release, and you can add more content, and then you can, like, get it out a lot quicker, and you can do more," and we were like, "Okay, yeah, let's do that." So we just started actually, I remember I was in Iran, in, I think, 2017 when we recorded our first episode, over the internet. It was, like, the strangest thing. We just did a call, which is so funny because it's, like, now how we do everything, but this was in 2017, and we hadn't really, like, perfected recording a podcast And yeah, we really just did that. That's, like, so surreal to me. Now thinking back, like, what was our setup? Like, I guess we were talking over Skype maybe? Um, but yeah, so we did that, and then we originally were on a network called Feral Audio, and then which eventually turned to Starburns Audio, and then, once I started working as a podcast producer at How Stuff Works, we brought the show over there. And then How Stuff Works, we got, acquired by iHeartRadio and just basically became iHeartRadio's podcasting network, so now technically our show's on iHeartRadio. I say it's, like, technically, like, it's a technicality because it really is just, like, it's my show and I work at iHeart, so I'm like, "I'm gonna do my show," and they're like, "Yeah, sure, do whatever you want." So, yeah, that's kinda the how it came about. It was very much like we wanted a place where we could talk about the feelings that we had that we thought were so universal to other children of immigrants that, like, I guess at the time in 2017 wasn't being discussed, I guess, on podcasts as much. Now podcasting has really boomed, so, um, there's a lot more people out there talking about it, but the whole theme of the show that we'd always go back to is that you're not alone. Like, these feelings are what a lot of us feel, and I think just, like, having all these different guests on our show, that's, like, a one big thing we learn is, like, it's all so relatable. Like, we all went through a very similar experience, like, emotionally. It might not be we might not be from the exact same cultures, but, like, there is some underlying themes that a lot of us children of immigrants experience.
I'd love to talk about that because, of course, we have a lot of things in common, and it's something that we proved on Mija in that sense because every season was a different immigrant family, and in the end, a lot of the storylines are very similar,
Mhm.
whether it's a Colombian family or a Chinese family or an Egyptian family.
Yeah.
So I would love to maybe if you could go, I don't know, I'd say your top three things that you've learned over 300 episodes you have, right? It's a huge
Yeah.
show. So maybe if you can give us your top three learnings, things that themes, general things that you feel like everyone really can relate to from all of these experiences.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think, the big one, which I mentioned earlier, is the sort of, like, therapizing of emotions, like, it's just not really a thing. Like, you very much, I think a big part of the struggle about being an immigrant is, like, you find that your parents are like, "There's no time or room to complain." Like, you need to just go out and do your thing and work hard to get to succeed, basically, and it's like coming from a different country, coming to America, you're all of a sudden like, "I'm in a new land, I don't speak the language, I need to either, like, try and get into a school, go to college, or I need to get a job and start working and, like,
Mhm.
work my way up." And, um my mom came and just went to college, but my dad came and, like, was working at, like, gas stations, working at oil companies, just, like, trying to, like, work his way, and then eventually went to university, but then spent, like, every summer working really hard to succeed, and, like, literally, like, I remember he said, like, "I learned to speak English, like, um, watching, TV or, like, watching," or my mom said she would watch, well, this is kind of in retrospect, not the greatest show, but she would watch, like, The Cosby Show on her break and, like, at work, working at a hotel, and, like, that's, like, where they would learn to speak English. They would just, like, engage with as much, like, American culture as possible to pick up as much as they could, um and this is sort of an aside, but, like, my dad also loved watching The Cosby Show, which is now, an unfortunate, part of history, but, um, he said, like or I not even he said, but something I've noticed is, like, in the show, like, Bill Cosby's dad character always is trying to, like, sit down and eat a sandwich, like, that's, like, the ultimate relaxation for a dad is to just kick back and eat a sandwich, and, like, to this day, like, one of my dad's favorite thing is to just sit down, make himself a sandwich, and relax. Like, that's his idea of, like, "This is what it means, like, I'm a dad, I finally get to sit down, my kids aren't bothering me, and I finally just get to eat my sandwich," or as he says, "sandwich." So that's it's just I'm like, wow, you literally, like you learn the tradition from watching a TV show, like, that's how you had to come in and be like, I'm an American now, I'm gonna just, like,
Have a
suck it
sandwich.
up. Yeah, take in as much as I can, and then there's certain things that just, like, left an imprint on who he is as like an Iranian American father. Um, and yeah, so that was always that was kind of an aside, but those sort of like feelings and dissecting your emotions has never really been a thing. And then sort of a big one is sort of the and one thing I do wanna say, like, something that we learned through all our interviews is, like, it's not this isn't always the case. This is the case the majority of the time, but we do have some outliers who didn't experience this, whose parents were immigrants and were just, a little more down to give their kids sort of that space to figure out what they wanted to do in life, but the majority want you to sort of go into a career that's stable. And, like,
Mm.
the stereotype is, like, the doctor, lawyer, engineer, or whatever, like, that's the stereotype, but, like, it
Yeah.
is just of, like, go into a career that's not, um, sorta like, "Oh, will you have to try really hard to make it?" Like, no, like, go in, study to be, like, an electrical engineer, you can get a job, you can create stability in your life, and then, get health insurance. That's
Mhm.
always, like, a very, sort of pushed agenda in these households we've seen, and, um, a lot of the people we talk to are, artists and, like, in this sort of
Mhm.
more creative realm, and so a lot of them had that experience of being like, "Yeah, it wasn't the easiest," including my own experience of being like, "Yeah, I'm not necessarily gonna go be a lawyer," which my dad always said I should be because I love to argue, but it's like I was just arguing with him because I wanted my freedom. But that was, you know, a big one and something. Uh, Again, I would like to stay it was actually quite nice to hear when you hear from someone and they're like, "Actually, like, my parents were supportive," because it gives you hope. You're like, "Yeah, that's nice to hear that they were supportive of you," and that they were like, "Yeah, go be a comedian or go be a writer or, go just explore what you wanna do in life," and it's nice to hear, I will say, versus, it's nice to see another side outside, like, the almost stereotypical experience that so much of us have.
Mm.
And then what's another one? I guess huh, I know there's others, but now that I've talked so much, I've almost, like, forgot what I was gonna say.
No, I really wanna talk about this last one that you said because it's so much of it's a juxtaposition of, oh, you can be an artist or you can be something that's stable,
Yeah,
and everyone pretty much goes to that. In a lot of the shows that we produce at Ochenter, there's always a character that, wants to be an actor or something, and the mom is like, "No, you
yeah,
can't do that, sweetie.
yeah.
I wanna eat. You're gonna wanna eat someday, and that's not gonna help you." And it's not it's kind of shutting you down, but I just had this conversation with someone this week about the fact that my mom growing up, I told her one day that I wanted to move to Paris. I was like, I'm taking French classes, and one day I will move to Paris. And my mom at the time, like, she's a single mom raising two kids, you know, you know, a paycheck to paycheck. It's not easy life. But instead of saying no, you can't do that, she said, dreaming is free. Soñar no cuesta nada. So it's exactly that. She could have been like, no, you can't do that. But she just, instead of like shutting me down, she just said, okay, you can dream. It's dreaming is free right now. You can dream all you want. And actually, I do live in Paris now, and I did
Oh,
end up
incredible.
achieving my dream. Um, but I think it means so much when a parent can do that. And I
Yeah,
think it's so cool now that we're that generation that grew up with many different experiences, of course, and now is able to even pass that on to the next generation as well. Like a lot of the other people I've been chatting to on this show is kind of asking themselves those questions about their kids or their, their cousins, even like the younger generation that maybe is, maybe one generation out away from this experience,
mhm,
and where they're not necessarily asking themselves these questions so much. Um, I'm curious if you had any learnings from people that are maybe on the younger side and who aren't necessarily growing up with the same. I don't want to say it's the same discrimination, but the same kind of societal requirements in that sense.
mhm,
Of course, we still have a lot of different issues, but I feel like now this younger generation coming up, they're more open and they're more like, yeah, I'm multicultural and what? And they're not facing the same kind of othering that we might have grown up with in the 90s and 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you had anyone that kind of pointed that out because I've been seeing that a lot with like the younger folks.
Um, that's a good question. It actually makes me think about how I don't really interact with a lot of sort of like Gen Z currently. Um, I I mean, I think that's incredible. It's like it's something I notice like how open the younger generations are and how it doesn't feel so yeah, like, the othering doesn't feel so pointed, like, you get othered for being a bad person, like, you have to have, like, really sort of terrible takes or, like, politics or, just be, like, a manipulative sort of gaslight, like, all these, like, sort of buzzwords, but, like, you have to be, like, just, like, a bad person to get othered. You don't really get othered as much because you're, like I mean, now and I'm also speaking in my very sort of coastal bubble, so I don't know what it's like to live in, like, sort of more the middle states of this country, um, but in my sort of world, like, I I was born and raised in California, so, yeah, I grew up in the '90s, in the early 2000s, and that was a tough time, like, people were still being pretty, terrible if they just didn't understand you, but I feel like now it's like people something I've noticed is they ask questions. They'll be like, "Oh, that's so interesting, like, where are you from?" Like, "Oh," like, it's almost, like, cool to be interested in people's culture, and, like, now that, like, food is, like, such a sorta, like, booming and food's always been a big industry, but, like, now it just feels like the chef culture and, like, knowing, like, different tastes and, like, seasonings and, like, it's now a real thing of, like, it's to be cultured is like, interesting, like, people are into that, and that's, like, something I didn't really experience growing up.
Mm,
And now it's like when I tell people I'm Persian, they're like, "Oh, I love like, just people that I don't know that well and I don't assume know a lot about, like, Persian culture will be like, "I love ghormeh sabzi." And you're like, "Whoa, like, you know what ghormeh sabzi is?" And it's like, "Oh, yeah, like, times are different." Like, people go and try these foods. You can go to, like, Brooklyn and go to, like, a hip Persian restaurant that's doing,
mhm,
like, bringing Persian flavors into, like, a modern twist, and you're like, yeah, because people now can just go and experience that. And now all of a
mm,
sudden they know about, like, tahdig and they know about all this different stuff, and you're like, that was never the case when I was growing up, even with adults. It's like all of a
mm,
sudden the world opened up, everyone's more interested, and, like, the younger generation is actually engaged versus I don't know. Yeah, it's true. I should talk to more younger people on the show because I feel like the youngest person we had, um I don't actually even know who the youngest person we had was, but it might be interesting to get that take. Talk to more
Yeah,
people like that.
it's a questioning that I've been having, is just on the whole thinking about how, the second, third, fourth generations out are gonna have this experience because it certainly feels like more of an open society, and they're not necessarily asking themselves the same questions. I
Yeah,
even say at one point I was thinking, well, will this show still be relevant because we won't be asking ourselves these questions, 10
I
years from
know.
now. And that's a beautiful thing that might be the case, that this will not be a questioning like, oh, how hard it was and all these things, but then like the discourse is going to be a different thing. There's going to be a different issue that we have to deal with. But of course, you know just seeing that it's going in a positive way is really exciting for me as a daughter of immigrants, and I think for the future generations at least. um
Yeah,
yeah.
that's
um
interesting.
yeah. So I do want to ask, now that you're even, I think even what you were saying, it seems like you would maybe agree with this statement. Like, is it cool to be ethnically ambiguous now?
I think so. I think it's always been cool to me, I think I'm ambiguous. Maybe when I was young, I didn't have this opinion because I was just so terrified and wanted to fit in, but, like, now I think it's cool. I think it's I I'm drawn to it. I feel like also maybe I'm just drawn to other ethnically ambiguous people because I feel like they can relate to my experience.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, like, I remember, like, a few years into the podcast, like, a year or 2, like, we were in our studios and, um, Alfred Molina was in our studios doing another podcast, and he, like, walked by our show poster and was like, "Ethnically ambiguous?" I've always been described as ethnically ambiguous, and that led to him being a guest on our show, and it's like,
Oh my gosh.
it's just someone you're like, "Oh god, I've always looked up to you, like, you're incredible." Even though he did play a Persian man in a movie once, which I thought always my whole life thought was so funny because it was Alfred Molina playing, like, this, against I think Sally Field was in the movie. It's called Not Without My Daughter. Very interesting
Oh,
film.
great movie. I
Yeah.
love that movie.
It's like you're like, "Oh,
It's
you
an
know,
old one.
it's
Yeah,
an
if you
old
know,
one,
you know.
so
It's a
long."
strange one and an old one, but
Yeah.
it's a good one.
Yeah, so I always, like, knew him from this film and also, whatever, just, like, Spider-Man, like, I just knew him. And so that was, like, really cool to have someone, like, be like, "This has been how I've been described my whole life," and give it sort of this, authenticity of, like, "Yeah, this is a very real thing," and so it's like, that I'm glad we chose something that was, in a way, like, relatable to a lot of people who maybe didn't have the words for it or just didn't, like, realize how relatable it was until, like, hear our podcast and be like, "Yeah, this is it." Like, this is what I've been called my whole life, and I wanna talk about it now, and when before, like, maybe to be like it was almost like it feels like people would be insulting you, like, if you're, like, in a casting room and they're like, "We think you're a little too ethnically ambiguous for this role." And it's like, "Okay.
It's actually a
Sorry,
good
you can
thing.
only play Persian men even though you're not Persian." And it's like, technically, I shouldn't
Technically, I'm something
you
else,
should
yeah.
cast a Persian man, but, I think it's, yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's cool that it's a label, but I think it's a positive label in the sense, like, you can't it's like it's a label that says that you can't be labeled. If that makes sense. And
It's the best
I'm fine with
thing.
that. Yeah.
So I always ask all of my guests to share maybe a beloved childhood memory, something that kind of describes your experience as a daughter of immigrants in a unique way. So maybe if you can flash back to a moment when you were growing up that kind of encapsulates that experience.
Um, oh, it's a good one. I think something that I've always really I think back on and um I was very glad I experienced is my parents put us, the kids, in, I grew up in the Bay Area of California, and so we had this sort of community of Persians where our parents put us in, um, like, Persian, like, speaking and writing classes. I think they wanted us to be, like, better writers, which, I can write a little bit of Farsi, but, I definitely did not I definitely considered speaking it more important than writing Farsi because I was like, "I'm not gonna be writing a book anytime soon, so I don't need to." Well, when I was a kid. And I don't know, I can, like, write my name in a few words, but, like, it's more important to me to be able to speak it, but we had to take these, like, Persian classes, and they were taught by just, like, a woman in the community, like, she just taught a bunch of she like, every night she had, like, different students come in and, we would go once a week and learn to whatever, write in Farsi. And, she had such, like, a massive group of students that once a year around Persian New Year, she would hold, like, this giant, like, show that we all got to be a part of. Like, we all got to play different roles in this show. Um, and then, like, a bunch of the parents in, like, the community would come out, and it would be, like, a giant concert hall, and it was, like, so fun. I remember that being, like, so much fun and, like, being able to be a part of this community with all these other students that, like, I didn't necessarily go to school with. They were just, like, kids I knew from, like, Persian class, you know? So, I always think of that as a very positive experience, There was also a lot of stuff in retrospect, there's this character well, I mean character, like this, I said he was a character in Iranian New Year, uh, who it's basically like a blackface character. It's a very strange his name is Haji Firuz, and it's a character that's like he's like almost like a Santa-like figure. He doesn't have a beard or anything, but like he dresses in all red. He wears like a little red hat, and it's the it's very strange, and I do now in retrospect, you're like, "Geez Louise, like, this is not you shouldn't do blackface." But it's like the character apparently comes out of, like, soot, basically, like, it's supposed to be like his face is covered in soot, and that's why it's blackface, and it's like people put blackface on in Iran during Iranian New Year and, like, play this character. Um, there was this sort of like, at the time there was, like they would cast 3 Haji Firuz. They didn't actually do blackface in my community, obviously, because they were not gonna paint the kids' faces black, and it was just I think at the time people kinda knew, like it was the Bay Area, it was like Berkeley, people knew, like, they were a little more progressive than maybe certain areas. Um, but it was like you would be so honored to get cast in these 3 roles. Only 3 kids got it every year, and people would like, they were, like, the roles you wanted. They were so hard to get. I never got cast. My brother got cast one year, and I was like, "God, he's so lucky." But, like, I just remember that being, like, you really wanted to be able to play Haji Fears. Basically, you came out at the end of the show and, like, passed out candy and treats and stuff, and it was, like, the most sought after character to play in this, like, I guess, New Year's sort of, like, festival show, but, yeah, that's kinda the memory I have that I always, like, really it was like like, I feel like when I was young, like, the time where I was, like, so happy and proud to be Persian because you were in your community and you're insulated, and then you didn't have to worry about, like, anyone who didn't get it being like, "What is this?" Because like, everyone got it and everyone was invested, and it was really fun.
That's amazing. Um, as an adult, do you have that same connection with your community now that you're kind of, I don't know if you're like still involved in the community like that? Do you seek it
Um,
out?
I mean, I have, like, Persian friends in LA that I mean, yeah, like, I still celebrate Iranian New Year. I, um engage in those, like, 13 days to, like, see Badr, and, like, I am very much yeah, I mean, I would say I'm engaged. I'm still very much, like, it's ingrained in me, like,
Mm.
I have to celebrate. I don't know how not to, and also, I still my parents are only, like, 5 hours away, so we're very much still close, so I don't know. I almost feel like I wouldn't even know how not to be Persian. I find myself doing and saying, like, I know, like, I'm turning into my dad, and I feel it. There's certain things that I find myself irked by, and I'm immediately, like, like, I start acting like my dad, and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just an old Persian man." Like, I just am. Like, it is who I am, and I can't run from it, and, um, yeah, I still engage because I
Mm.
wouldn't even know how not to.
That's incredible. A lot of people find it hard, like when they move away from their family. You're no longer having to be kind of forced to do the traditions like you are when you're a kid, and that kind of pulling you into this thing if you don't really know it. Um, yeah, it's difficult. So that's incredible that you've kept that connection. I know you're also involved in a lot of diversity and like inclusion efforts at your work. I would love to hear about some of the projects you're most proud of because you're proud of your culture, you're proud of your identity, you're doing it in this like individual podcast that you feature your own voice so much. And we're gonna have Shireen on the show. Actually, I'm gonna
Yeah,
interview her later.
that'd be cool.
Yeah, but I know you do so much more. So, what are some projects that you're particularly proud of that you've kind of brought on?
Yeah, so in 2020 I created a program called Next Up for iHeart, and it's sort of a diversity inclusion program. It's basically there was a lot of sort of like podcasting boot camps for like women and minorities that I would see at other networks, and I always thought mm, like iHeart can do that. Like it's a massive network. Like why don't we do something like that? And then so I talked to a bunch of people and did a lot of research and created this like sort of boot camp like program for podcasting called Next Up, which is basically like 6 months where we have 8 participants, all, people of color or minorities or, people from marginalized groups in this program where we give them an opportunity to develop and produce their own. shows about whatever they would like to talk about or whatever they think is important to tell their own stories, basically. Um, and uh, we in 6 months, basically, we pay for everything. We give them all the equipment. We give them mentors. As the creator of the program, I'm very much involved week to week, and so are the people who help me. And we basically help them develop, produce, record, edit, and have like a full. So by the end of the program, the 6 months, they have 3 recorded, fully edited, mixed, mastered episodes, and then a pitch deck. And originally in the program, it was my original idea was at the end of the program, um, they get the creators get to then pitch their podcast directly to the iHeart development team who can greenlight them if they'd like. Um, and the idea was that like we don't own any of the big part of the show or the program was like I don't want to take anyone's IP. We're not here to just like IP farm from like people of color. Like that's we've watched industries do that for years. That's not okay. So the big part of my sort of thing was like, if we're gonna do this, it's their IP. We don't touch it. If we don't take their show, they get to walk away, do whatever they want with it. They get to keep their equipment. They get to go be a podcaster, go to another network, go do something else, whatever. Produce it independently. It's none of our business. We can't take anything from these people. We can only give. Um, in our first round, which finished in I think like end of 2021, early 2022 was, a success that actually iHeart came and got a sponsor. Toyota came and sponsored all 8 of the shows to be released on iHeart, which was great. Shows like Partition, which was about the India-Pakistan partition of 1947. We have a show that's, still airing called BFF, Black Fat Femme, hosted by Dr. Jonathan Higgins. Um, we have, oh gosh, When You're Invisible, hosted by Maria Diaz, which is about being, a child of people who work behind the scenes to basically make sure the world runs. So it's like housekeepers, the cooks, the people who like run the like shipping packaging services at universities, like all these different people who don't get looked at twice but are the backbone of our country. And so like all these different shows, about 7 shows got released, and they were all, these incredible shows. So which I'm so proud of all of them because they really came through and really worked hard on their shows and were able to release them on iHeart. And then um, we oh, and another great one, Beauty Translated, currently airing, hosted by Carmen Laurent, which is all about being a trans woman in the South, which I think is a great, incredible show. Um, And yeah, so we just actually in March started the second round of the program. So we're currently like in it right now. We're helping develop shows right now, and we have this incredible new group of 8 people where we have Dee Borrego, who's doing a show about being a HIV positive trans woman. We have uh, oh gosh, now I literally am like in it right now, and I can't even think. Um, Autumn Harris is doing a show about being a dancer in the clubs and like sort of what you know, like society and like class and like socioeconomic divides, like what that being a dancer, like what that looks like in the club and what that says about like society. It's a very interesting dissection of being um a person who every day goes and dances in these clubs to make money and like what that says about us as people. And um then we have another show, actually a woman working about a show, Roya. She's working on a show about Iran. And we have a lot of great people right now. We have a girl named Nicole who's working, she's part of Navajo Nation, and she's working on a show about being like a modern Native American woman in this country. So we have a lot. I want to name them all, but I'm just like starting, the second I start thinking about things, I forget about everything. Um, but yeah, we have incredible creators. I'm very excited. We're very much like in it right now. So I'm excited to see what they create by like the, beginning of September when the program starts to end. So that's really what I'm most proud of. Like I I think it's like if nothing else happens in my life, And this is it. At least I got to, like, use my space and position at iHeart to create this program and give other peoples the opportunity to put their shows and stories out there, which, we've really had to hustle to do with Ethnically Ambiguous. So,
Mm.
you know, I'm glad I can just provide that opportunity for them. I like to
Thank
think, like, I got my foot in the door and I should, like my foot is still in the door and I'm like, get in, everyone, get in," like, "Hurry, hurry, hurry, hurry. They let me in, so let's all" I'm just trying to get everyone in while I'm still here.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that work that you're doing. That's incredible. I can't wait to hear them. Um,
Yeah.
so we are coming to the end of the interview. I want to ask you some speed round questions. We
Yes.
ask all our guests these very quick speed round questions. So, what language do you swear in when you accidentally touch a hot plate?
Actually, I swear it in English.
Okay. Favorite food?
Oh, probably fesenjan, which is like a Persian dish that not a lot of people love, but I think it's legendary.
What is it made? What is it made of?
It's like a stew, but it's like a thick stew and it has chicken in it, but it has it's kind of like a pomegranate, almond, like nut flavor stew. It is a very sort of interesting taste. It's like a lot of flavors at once. And a lot of people don't like it, but I think it's incredible.
Love it. What's a song you've had in your head this week?
Oh, this week? This is random, but Reba's the night
The
the
intro
lights
music?
no, oh, I do love that song though, but the night the lights went out in Georgia, it's this
Okay.
really it's a jam by Reba. It's
Okay.
random. I've been on a Reba kick recently because I just saw her in concert, so I've been listening to a lot of her music.
Incredible. Uh, what's your last Google search that you're comfortable sharing?
My last Google search, that's a very good question. Let me look at my history. Um, I was looking at oh, apparently they're, like, releasing all the, scripts to Succession in a book form. I don't know, I was reading about that because I was like, "They're gonna release them all?" But I guess they are, yeah. I mean, obviously, you can't get the 4th season until, it airs, but I was curious, like, when that's happening, how that's happening, and if it actually is, like, coming from the writers, and it is, which is cool.
Amazing. What
Yeah.
is your biggest dream?
Oh, man, my biggest dream. I mean, to keep telling stories like I'm telling, I guess. It would be nice to do it on, like, a even bigger platform, be able to I would love to take people's shows and help them sell their, like, IP and make it like, get bigger, like, sell a TV show, make a movie, like, get people to further, get their stories out there. That would be great. Almost create, like, a podcast. Well, I mean, saying the word IP always feels so, like, corporate speak, like I'm trying to, like, steal, but it's more just, like, I wanna help people further tell more stories about marginalized communities and people of color and get more stories like that out there for more mainstream audiences, because I think that's the only way to, like, further, uh, stop the othering, if that makes sense.
Mm, yeah, that's so true. All right. Last question is what is your advice to any other daughter of immigrants, Mijas, who are scared to take a leap and start telling their story? What is the thing that you would give them as advice?
I mean, something that worked for me this might be sort of, chaotic advice, but just compartmentalize the fear and anxiety. That's a lot of what I do. I have a lot of anxiety, and I just compartmentalize it, and I jump in head first, just almost blind confidence that I don't necessarily have, but I just do it, and I see because I think so much of, like, it is being like, "No, no, like, stay in your place, don't step out," because that's, like, what my family taught me my whole life is, like, just be a good Persian woman, and it's like, I defy that, and I just go and I do it and I don't try and overthink it, because I think if I think too much about it, that's when my anxiety kicks in and I start to be like, "Oh no, why did I say that?" or "Oh, why did I do that?" And just don't think about that aspect of it. Just do it, tell your story, release the podcast, whatever, write the script, and then turn away from it. And don't let yourself overanalyze what you've just done, because I think so much of us get scared and you get like imposter syndrome and you start to be like, I shouldn't be the one to do this. Don't think about it. Just go and say, I am the person who should tell this story. And then don't think any further about it and let yourself go. Release yourself from that sort of stress and anxiety and fear, and then just keep doing it over and over again, because that's just what I do every week. I just let it go. Once it's done, it's done. It's out of my control and I have to just move forward. And that's what I do every week. That's the only way I know how to survive, because if I don't, then it'll eat away at me and I'll stop, trying to create. And I don't, yeah, I don't want to do that.
Amazing. That's great advice. Thank you so much. So much. This has been so
Having me.
fun. It's so exciting also to hear the incredible work you're doing, to bring other stories into the ears of many thousands, millions. So one last thing is, where can we find your show? Give us a shout out to your socials, please.
Yes. Our show is called Ethnically Ambiguous. It's on all podcast platforms. It's hosted by me and my co-host Shireen Yunez, who you will hear eventually on the show. Yeah, you can find it anywhere you find podcasts. Um, my Twitter is at Anna Hossnieh, ANNAHOSSNIH. I promote all the shows I work on that Twitter page. So you'll see I'm just constantly posting about the shows that I'm working on. You can follow me on Instagram at selling Hossnieh. I like to say that's where I sort of like sell myself to you, because again, I'm just like promoting the work we're doing. And then I actually have a Substack which I write on about different sort of feelings I have um, about any sort of pop culture. Just like, I talk a lot about my family and sort of growing up as a child of immigrants, a lot about plastic surgery and like sort of the idea of what it means for like looks in Persian communities and that sort of obsession. But yeah, that's sellinghostnieh.substack.com if you want to go read my writing. It's all free. I don't charge for any of it. Just a creative outlet to write, because I feel like I get so bogged down with like producing that I need a place to get my feelings out. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for
You know,
this. This is great.